Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Electoral Area Services Committee for Thursday, June 16th, 2022. I would like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is located on the territories of the Seashelt and Squamish First Nations. Just before I call for adoption of the agenda, I believe Director Ties has an item that he wants to add.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got an item of new business called Bylaw 310 and 722 comparison that I would like to discuss later. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll put that in just after Annex E, just after the last report. Directors, is there anything else that you'd like to add to the agenda? If not, I look for motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Moved, seconded, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Next up, we do have presentations and delegations, so I'll ask for motion to receive the delegation materials as well as the reports and communications, please. Moved, seconded, all those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 2. We have a delegation from... There's a whole lot of names on this list. I'm not sure who's speaking first, or... Come on up to the microphone. Nope, not on yet.
When the red light's on.
Yeah, helps when you press the right button.
All right, we will turn it over to you.
Good morning. My name is Peter Galbraith. Good morning. My name is Peter Galbraith. I'm from the Square Bay wastewater area. I have today with me Frank Rogers from the Curran Road wastewater area. In essence, our presentation is on behalf of both of us, but actually speaking really for all, as I'll explain, for all wastewater areas in Area B. This issue, we're speaking on the topic of the primarily the letter that was submitted. 2 letters, one from Square Bay, one from Curran Road, dated April the 29th, that are in your agenda package. The second part that we wish to talk about today is related to the funding aspects of asset management. I will deal with the letter first, some brief comments on that, and then move to the second part. As I said, Square Bay and Curran Road have worked closely on the issue of the wastewater fees for the frontage fee component particularly, that started about 2.5 years ago. That's why you will see that the 2 letters that you got are very, very similar. As I've alluded to, while letters have not been submitted from the Jolly Roger area and the Secret Cove area, we do have some level of confirmation from them that they support the positions that are taken in those letters. So it effectively all of the wastewater areas in Electoral Area B. The approach that we have presented in the letter is an attempt to bring to conclusion the ongoing discussion regarding now what frontage fees should be, that's been going on for about 2.5 years. We have based the submission in the letter on a staff report that was dated, I think it was November the 18th last year. And as such, we hope that while we've varied it slightly from the recommendations in that staff report, we are hopeful that you will be able to move it forward quickly and go through the formalities you may need to within the SCRD to bring the matter to a close. I think I would like to think that it's a win-win for both the SCRD and the residents if that can be done. It's an issue that's been hanging around our heads for quite a while, and we would like to see closure on it. The second topic focuses on the matter of, let's back up. Asset management, in our view, has two distinct phases, let's say, or implementing an asset management plan. The first phase heavily focuses on assessing what the life of the various facilities to which you want to apply an asset management planning philosophy to, and then determining their lifespan, determining what you might need to do to those facilities over the course of their life, and then trying to put estimated costs against all of those items. The second phase relates to determining how you're going to, or how, I won't say you, how one is going to fund those costs that are predicted over the lifespan. What's gone on so far in the last 2.5 years has been heavily focused, I would say, in terms of what the costs are likely to be. Some progress related to how to fund them, but really that is where the emphasis going forward needs to be. We view those two phases as really they're linked, but they need distinctly different skill sets and expertise in bringing them to successful conclusion. There's three ways to fund those capital works that you'll identify in an asset management plan. Capital reserves, which are built up over time. Debt funding, you borrow money to fund the portion of the work that you don't have reserves for, and grants. The approach that has been suggested initially of funding all costs by a reserve built up over time, is fundamentally unfair to current residents. In particular, in situations where many or most of those costs are not going to be incurred for 30 or 40 years, or let alone 50 to 80 years that conceivably could be covered under the plan. Similarly, leaving everything to be funded by borrowing, by debt funded, is unfair to future residents. Notwithstanding the SCRD's view, or the information they've gathered, that grants may not be available in an indefinite future, we don't believe that that is a reason to exclude them from the analysis of how you may shoot to cover these funds. Further, consider a situation where, given that the SCRD has leaned towards 100% reserve, or indicating that's what they would prefer, consider the situation that could happen if you do get towards 100% fully funded situation, and then you're closing in on getting some work done, and there are grants available. Do you really think that a senior level of government will put you at a high priority to get a grant if you have it fully funded? In other words, by definition, by gathering all of the reserves in advance, you're shooting yourself in the foot from a source of funds that have historically been there. Our informal discussions with asset management professionals have indicated that nowhere has there been a successfully implemented funding scheme that is built 100% on reserves. The successful systems thus far appear to have used a mix of those three sources. We believe that the right model starts with, as an example, a third from reserve. Your target is a third from reserves, a third from debt funding, and a third from grants, should they be available. Further, we believe that the SCRD needs to have a formal written policy that will govern how you want to fund the works within an asset management system, an asset management world, let's say. Because otherwise, if you don't have those written policies, you're going to have ad hoc solutions that will not necessarily be that supportable. I mentioned that the proposal that we have made is based on the staff report of November. One difference is that while that staff report proposed a 3-year program of rates starting at 400 a year, going up by inflation over the remaining 2 years for a total of a 3-year period, we're proposing a 5-year period. The fundamental reason for that is not dollars and cents. It is because the SCRD assures us that the intent is to implement asset management over all of your facilities. We don't believe that a 3-year time frame will allow adequate learning and experience to be gathered related to the implementation of systems. So we see that a 5-year period allows a better chance for the wastewater areas not to be the guinea pigs in implementing an asset management system and the funding for it. So we believe that 5-year period is quite important. We also believe, coming back to my comment about the 2 phases in asset management, the costing and then the funding, that the SCRD should look for outside assistance in the realm of experts who have successfully implemented funding schemes for their asset management programs. As I say, not just doing the cost estimating, but working with the jurisdiction to come up with viable, acceptable, sustainable funding mechanisms. Lastly, we strongly believe that the SCRD should ask that staff reports on alternatives for funding going forward shouldn't move towards a recommended solution in terms of funding, because we truly believe that this is an issue that truly needs a lot of background experience in this area, and we believe that the decisions on it need to be made at, as an example, the SCRD committee and board levels. So we're strongly concerned that there is a trend evident in terms of an attempt to come up with 100% funding or reserve schemes through reports so far. The idea of the 400 a year fee at the moment, that is not seen, and we would agree, it's not seen as a permanent solution related to fees. So the underlying theme, we believe, still exists within the SCRD, that a fully funded, fully reserve funded scheme is the way to go. And we're strongly against that. So in closing, we ask the SCRD to consider and to move our frontage fee proposal through the steps necessary in order for it to be approved. We feel that that's a reasonable request to make, seeing as it so closely matches the staff report of November the 18th. It's not brand new. There's a subtle variation, and we ask that that be moved quickly. Secondly, we ask that the SCRD seriously consider the other recommendations and suggestions we've made this morning regarding the mechanisms of funding and how you could go about achieving a viable saleable funding mechanism. So before closing, I would ask, with your permission, that could you allow a couple of moments for Frank Rogers to add some words? As I said, I've been speaking on his behalf or his residents' behalf. I'd like him to reconfirm that for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Directors, I represent the Curran Road facility, the 47 ratepayers. They concur with the presentation that was just made by Peter. And very briefly, some of the communications I've used, I've looked at the $400 a year levy for 47 residents over a 3-year period would generate about $56,000 in revenue. 5 years, about 94, 10 years, 188, and 20 years, $376,000. That doesn't include inflation nor interest from the investment. And that seemed to be a very saleable series of numbers. We had one objection, which would do a barroom lawyer proud, but otherwise, most of the ratepayers certainly agree with what we presented today. And to finish, as a ratepayer myself, setting myself outside of the group, I put it this way: it's a very digestible way to pay for my waste without undue constipation. So there you are. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Directors, any questions for our delegation today? Director McMahon?
Yeah, that's really hard to follow up on. I just gotta say, I don't think I want to go down that particular path in terms of puns, because we could be here all morning getting more disgusting by the minute. I really appreciate the residents' initiative coming forward with this. I mean, I realize it's not my area, but I do have 2 of these sewage treatment plants in my area, which we haven't fully dealt with yet. And I would like to see a resolution for these waste systems now, because we are going into an election. So, you know, the residents, if we don't come up with a solution, the residents are going to be faced with re-educating an entire new board, which may be a considerable challenge. I do have a few concerns. And I know that the 2% figure for inflation, I think, came out of our staff report, but 2% inflation is in the rearview mirror now. And yeah, we're going to have to rethink that kind of thing. You know, 3 years might just off the cuff be more comfortable than 5 years, but on the other hand, it could easily take us 5 years to get organized. I like the idea of a policy for funding these plants, but having said that, they're all different. They're all different in terms of size and complexity and how long they've been around. I've got one that dates back to the 1970s. And, you know, so the generational equity formula in this varies quite a bit. Comparing something that people have been paying into or possibly underpaying into for 50 years is not the same as a relatively new plant. So anyway, great discussion. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and coming forward with solutions rather than complaints, which is brilliant. Thanks.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Ties?
Yes, thank you for your presentation, and I concur with Director McMahon here that much appreciated. I do think that a formula needs to be found where some debt financing for large capital expenditures is part of the equation, because otherwise we won't even have an opportunity to provide grant funding or to apply for grants at all if it's already bought and paid for. So I do think that I don't know if 30-30-30 is a reasonable formula, but I think there does need to be some sort of consideration towards debt funding, and I think I'll leave that up to the experts. I guess my question to staff is whether we will get a report that kind of outlines how this model would compare to what staff's proposal was, and whether that is a sustainable solution. I guess, I guess that's a question to staff. Thanks.
I think that's going to be up to us to ask for if we want it, but I see both Mr. Doyle and CFO Perot are on screen, so go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So as the model presents, especially for Square Bay, the current model that was presented at the last Infrastructure Services Committee does factor in 50% debt. We also factor in 50% reserve. So we have changed the model already to factor in debt funding in here. We did present information related to grant funding. And so as that is an uncommitted funding source, it's not best practice to allot for something that you can't guarantee. So there has to be some sort of balance there for sure. As far as a policy goes, we do have several types of policies, but we don't have any prescription per se. And so I think that's what some of the directors are alluding to, in the sense of prescribing what certain types of rates are, because they are so different depending on what service. So we do have certain types of policy, like the financial sustainability policy. And we do have a policy that's going to be coming forward related to long-term financial planning and asset management planning, coming to the June 23rd Committee of the Whole as well for the board's consideration. So staff are already presenting some items there. So also, if I could, Chair, just say that there is ongoing community sessions going on for the wastewater facilities. I believe that for Half Moon Bay, just recently, in the last couple of months or so, there was some sessions to try to approach ratepayers and educate them on these types of rate analysis, policies, procedures, and just an open dialogue related to their facility, really. So they happened boots on the ground at the specific facilities, and those are ongoing in the coming months.
All right. Thank you. Director Pratt.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation, and thank you for to the CFO for those comments. So that might deal with the asset management policy piece that the delegations have brought forward. Quick question. You had said that Jolly Roger and Secret Cove had sent letters as well.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry for clarity.
Okay. Yep.
Sorry. No, it's still on. No, the only two communities submitting letters are Square Bay and Kern Road.
Yeah.
There has been informal dialogue with people in both jurisdictions, and it is our understanding that there is a broad support. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, no, I wanted to clarify that, because I've very definitely heard from Curran and Square Bay, and hadn't heard as much from Secret Cove and Jolly Roger. And
Right.
I do know Square Bay had a couple of sessions in April, I think. Yes, or beginning of
March.
April. Yeah, beginning of
April.
end of April, end of March, beginning of April. I had attended the online, couldn't attend the in-person, which were fantastic. There was a good, excellent dialogue there with staff and residents, and I understand it was quite positive, quite positive feedback within the community, which is great. I guess I'm going to echo some of Director McMahon's concerns about not letting this go too much longer as we are going into election and looking at the probability that faces around this board, very definite probability that faces around this board will change, especially potentially in my area. Anyways, I'd like to know from staff what a possible timeline would be for bringing this back, what we would be looking at for defining this, when we're going to, just the timeline when we could be bringing this back, if it can be done before the election, so we have some certainty for residents around this. If I remember correctly, last time, usually we're looking at utility rates and frontage fees. We're looking at those in November, which is potentially post-election.
All right. I don't know. Oh, CFO Peru.
Thank you, Chair. So again, like I said earlier, there's two policies coming forward to the committee at the end of the month. And if that policy is approved, it's going to speak to timing related to our rate setting. We would like to move it earlier in the financial planning process, which means butting it right up against our financial planning policy is really troublesome. And with the election this year, we've been having discussions about when we should have those, but likely it will be potentially October or November or December. We can potentially have further discussions as to whether or not there's any ability and capacity to bring it sooner than that, which would likely be sometime in September. Having that said, there's a lot of work to do in the meantime. There is, I think, scheduled engagement sessions that align with what the anticipated timelines are. And without GM Rosenboom here, I do hazard to guess, because I'm not specifically aware of some of the plans. I don't know if Manager Doyle can comment to that.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. The capital plan revision review process is underway. We're currently seeing utilities department bring in some projects to us to consider to capture in the plans. And as per the board direction from last year, we're instituting an engagement program this year that we intended to use to help inform the rate update to be brought forward in the timeline that GM Pro alluded to there.
Okay. Follow up, Director Pratt, or you're okay? All right. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thanks for the presentation, and I agree with most of your points. Having a voluntary rate increase is always something that is good. I believe the only way we could actually implement this would be to update the bylaw, and it actually happens in November of each year. So it would be the next board that would be doing that unless we did something extraordinary to get the bylaw updated earlier. Because that's what sets the rates, as I understand it. And I believe that's what GM Perot was talking about there. The other aspect is not all plants are in the same age. Some are brand new. Some are failing now. Yep. Some were in the middle of trying to find money because they have failed. So, well, I understand the $400 is an average, and because of the size of plant relative to the number of people that are using it, 400 seems to work across the spectrum. Be interesting to see over time if it actually does. But I believe it was a good starting point. And some of the plants that in Area A, we used that when we set the rates last time. We were either 400 was good enough, or we're starting and escalating to get them to 400. So I think for most of the other plants, it's actually been done. So this is, I'm just thinking out loud, and I don't know what the conclusion of this would be, but that's my thoughts on it. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Lee. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the comments on community engagement. That has been a real concern on behalf, for I think most of the 15 or 17 wastewater areas. Square Bay, I used the term guinea pig a little while ago. Square Bay was actually the guinea pig on the new approach, or the re-engagement, let's say, program and that's just been mentioned. And I would like to say, yes, it was positive. It was a great step. Two side comments. One, I know Kern Road is wondering, well, what about us? When do we get there? So there is an appetite for those to begin. And, I guess everybody's busy, but somehow or other, I would say time needs to be made to move that along. And I've heard that's being done, but I haven't heard any dates. Second comment related to these, and the CFO used a word in there about education. With respect, there's also an issue of hearing and listening. And the education seems to keep coming across from the SCRD as to what you think the main function of the engagement is. I would put forward that it's listening to what the communities are saying is, if not greater, it's at least equal. And I'm a little worried that it keeps coming back to this issue, education, and that doesn't feel quite right. And I would say that one of the reasons why the Square Bay session, the face-to-face and the online one went well, was that it went both ways. So that's one of the reasons it was successful. If it was just quote-unquote education, then it probably wouldn't have been.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. Director Hills, your turn.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. And one of the things I like about the presentation is that those two parts. The first part is kind of that technical analysis. The second part for me is that's the political discretion. And the one-third, 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 one of the things I understand that asset management, the reason it came about in 2009, that changing of public sector, is because senior levels of government don't want a grant. So that is their intent is, we want you as a community to fund your own services. Don't come to the federal government in 30 years or 20 years. So that's the political. So in order for us to have a political policy that predicts the future, I think would be a difficult thing to go with a one-third, one-third, one-third. So I'm just going, I think right now we're kind of looking at more of that analysis, and what I think I hear is that those numbers that go into the chart and will be paid into the 2023 will be coming through the process as it comes in the fall, leading into the setting of the rates. That's the time it'll happen. So that's the time frame. But it's that intergenerational equity thing. Young people at 20 years old versus older people at a more advanced age have a different version of the future and the past. And that's what I keep hearing is the federal government doesn't want to come and help us out. So that's why, and for me, a grant this is the bird in hand versus two in the bush. You can have all the grants in the future, but as CFO Perot says, we need certainty in that funding. So yeah, I think those are the political decisions of the future in terms of the split. So that's just a comment. Thanks.
So if I can just further comment, we are not saying in any way that we believe 30-30-30 is a one-size-fits-all, but there needs to be a starting point. And so we're saying then that can be finessed for the given needs by jurisdiction, by wastewater area, whatever. There can be a bunch of factors. Could be the demographics, who knows? But the bottom line, you need somewhere to start, and it sure as heck isn't 100% reserves. And I appreciate the SUDs moving away from that. We don't want to see any backsliding towards 100% reserves.
All right. Follow up?
Yeah, and I believe that's clear right now. It's not just 100%. There's the split of the model of the debt funding and the reserves is, so that's kind of where your guys going. It's that other, what that other contribution from other levels of government might be, which is kind of the unknown aspect of it. Yeah, but does that make sense? The debt to reserve is already undergo?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but, you know, if you don't want to move to a situation where you couldn't get a grant if there was a grant. So arguably, the safety valve on no grants is debt. So yeah, it's. I'm saying there's three balls in the air, and yes, it takes a bit of how will I call it, sort of analysis and whatever, and good luck to figure out the right mix. But you do need somewhere to start.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with any questions for our delegation? Director Pratt?
No questions, just thank you. And when, I guess, we'll have a very full discussion next week when we have that come forward at COW with the asset management policy. And as we've said before, we don't typically, it's not our policy or procedure to make a motion following a specific policy at the. So this is something that we'll be taking back, and I know we're all considering it, and we all appreciate the time and effort. So thank you so much. All right.
All right. Sherry will take care of it. So thank you for being here. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, or you're welcome to take your leave of us, whatever suits you. Moving on to Annex C, Pender Harbor Ranger Station lease renewals. And this is Manager Clarkson or GM Gagnon. Miss Manager Clarkson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And essentially all four lease arrangements are due for expiry in August of 2022. Staff recommend that the leases are all renewed, as the leases are in good standing and the lessees are good tenants. Staff are recommending that we renew the leases for another period of 5 years for the Pender Harbor Cultural Center, including the Pender Harbor Reading Center, the Serendipity Child Development Society, the Pender Harbor Gallery, and the Pender Harbor Music Society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Directors, any questions? Director Hiltz?
In the middle of saving. Yes, I do have a question. Absolutely supportive of, it's a vital community asset. A question I have, and it's for staff. It's about the heritage registration of the Pender Harbor Ranger Station. Back in 2016, they were looking at having the Pender Harbor Ranger Station as a registered underneath of the SCRD Heritage Register. And so the question is, has there been any update on that? And the significance of the question is, does that status enhance the ability to apply for grants in the cultural realm that could help with funding repairs and things like this into the future? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question. I am aware of a discussion about that and a recommendation to the Planning Committee in 2016. I know that in order to answer the question about grants and accessibility to that sort of funding, not wanting to speculate, I would guess that it would probably open some areas. However, I guess in terms of the actual application for heritage designation, we would have to review the file. Thank you very much.
GM Gagnon?
Yes, thank you. Just to follow up to Manager Clarkson's response, Director Hiltz, there was a recommendation in June of 2016 that the application was withdrawn, and that is recorded in the minutes. Resolution 18816. So I don't know why. I haven't dug deep into that, but it was withdrawn. So, and then Managers Clarkson response in terms of access to grants. Yes, there are grants, but he is correct there. Creating the status also then puts very strict limitations on what you can do and can't do on the building in order to maintain its significance, its heritage significance. So there's pros and cons to that. So, but I'm not sure why the application was withdrawn without digging further. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Just curious, if I understood that right, would that be us applying to ourselves for heritage status? Isn't that a bit strange?
So I am not the expert in this area. I would rely on most likely GM Hall, but my understanding is that as a regional district and in the municipal world, which is what I'm more familiar with, we used to be able to have statements of significance for buildings that we wanted to have a designated status for. Then we could also apply to the province to have designated status, which was a higher level of status and access to additional grants. I believe that the way I read the resolution from 2016 was that we wanted to submit a statement of significance to the province to have it designated. But regardless, that application was withdrawn. But that's my understanding, but that's an Alberta world and a municipal world. So I rely on Manager or GM Hall, who I don't believe is here today. Perhaps maybe a planner can answer that question if further follow-up is required, Director McMahon. Thank you. Oh, there's GM Hall. Thank you.
GM Hall, go ahead.
Thank you. GM Gagnon got it precisely. We do maintain a heritage register. It's honorific. It's local government level recognition, not provincial, and it's usually undertaken at the request of an owner. And in the case of some of the buildings that are currently on our register, or would be the case with the ranger station, we are the owner. So we would be recommending to ourselves that something be designated. That said, there are buildings like Roberts Creek Hall on our heritage register that are not SCRD owned. Thanks.
Thank you. Directors, any other? Go ahead, Director Hiltz.
Thanks. Yeah. So that was a question. So unresolved. So it was focused more on the SCRD register. That was the one, not the higher level provincial. I got two other questions. One is it's a community asset, and I guess in the back of my mind I'm sort of thinking Cooper's Green as kind of, this idea of SCRD assets run by local other nonprofits. So is there a process for of the non-leasees to use the facilities, and how does the booking happen? Like can I don't know who I would call if I wanted to book something there. Is that accessible to the rest of the public? And the other question is the park official name called Ranger Station Park? That's the other question. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question, and through the chair. To answer the second question first, yes, the registry that the SCRD maintains, the property that the buildings reside on are the Pender Harbor Ranger Station Park. Our Pender Harbor Cultural Center, I guess, would be on the Pender Harbor Ranger Station Park, if that provides some clarity. Thank you. And I guess, to answer the first question, within the lease arrangements, the lessees maintain the authority and responsibility of booking and hosting events, organizing and making sure they're adhering to any safety planning, those sorts of things. SCRD is relatively hands-off. We assist where needed. But yes, the events and facilities, when available in the booking schedules, are available to other members of the non-lessee public. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that answer. I don't see any other hands up. We do have a couple of recommendations here on page 5. If somebody would like to make them. Director Pratt?
I would happily move the recommendations on page 5. Sorry to get ahead of you, Director Lee.
It's all good. I do see you seconding that. So I don't see any other hands up for questions, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex D, Development Variance Permit DVP 00081, 9517 Brooks Lane. Turn this over to Planner Nick Copes.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this development variance permit application is to reduce the setback to the natural boundary for overhangs and decks to permit the construction of a new single-family dwelling. The applicant had previously applied for a variance to the setback from Brooks Lane, but withdrew that application and modified the plans in order to address neighborhood concerns related to parking and protection of mature trees. The applicant's new proposal would provide additional parking, and the applicant has also provided an arborist report with measures to protect the mature trees. Notifications were mailed to neighboring properties, and one comment is attached. Additionally, 2 more comments from neighboring residents in support of the application were received after the comment deadline. Due to the site constraints and the applicant's work to address neighborhood concerns, staff recommend issuance of the permit with conditions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Copes. Having heard staff's introduction of the proposed development variance permit, if there's anybody in the audience, virtual or real, that wishes to speak to the application, we ask that you raise your hand, and we will give you permission to speak up at the front table here or online. When you speak, please give your full name for the record. In order to keep our meeting moving, we ask that you please keep your comments focused and limit them to 3 minutes. Once the committee has heard from all those wishing to speak, we'll proceed with a motion and discussion towards a recommendation to the board. So with all that being said, is there anybody that wishes to speak? Come on up to the table.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Kai Jenkins, the general contractor for our customers, Tiffany Murray and David Pikush. We have been representing the owners of the property for about a year in planning this family home for them. At this point in time, we feel that we have taken all the due diligence into account of the neighborhood, environmental concerns, septic field preparations and planning and engineering. The protection of the trees was paramount to the neighborhood, and we have done all of our due diligence with that in mind to keep those trees healthy for the long-term future, as well as the water quality and the enjoyment of the cove for the neighborhood. Yeah, that's it. I just want to thank everyone for their time and look forward to this moving on to the next step here.
All right. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to this development variance permit? All right. Seeing no other hands up, I now turn to directors. Any questions? Director Pratt.
Thank you, and thank you to the applicant and staff for a very comprehensive report. I will say that I did forward to my the chair of the Area Planning Commission for Area B, because being that it wasn't recommended to go to the APC, I just wanted to see what her feedback was on that, and she has requested that it does go to the APC just for a review, just so they can look at it. And I know with it is recommended the staff because it's been very collaborative in nature. So I'm not sure. I don't really have a question. I just want to bring that forward as a comment, because it would mean bringing it forward. It would mean a bit of a delay in the process, I think. Probably not too much, but being that board process and all of that. So I'm wondering what the timeline would be if we did because I don't really see much change that would happen. It would just, it's essentially, it's a nod to the APC, so I'd look to staff on timeline-wise.
Yes, thank you for the question. If the application were referred to the APC, it would have to come back for further consideration. One factor that is in play with this application is that this application has been made under bylaw 310. And so it is, well, hopefully that the variance to bylaw 310 would still be when bylaw 310 is in effect.
Thank you. Has the APC meeting already happened for June? No? Except that it wouldn't be able to be turned around by board before then, which means it'd be the July APC, which means it wouldn't come back until September. Yeah. So I don't, it's entirely at your prerogative. Go ahead. Come up to the microphone.
It's this button.
It's already on.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, you guys can hear me? Okay. There's been a change in the APC director, right, or committee leader, because I had actually talked to him previously, because that APC meeting that we were going to go to was actually canceled. And so we took the initiative to go and meet with all of our neighbors and made changes to the plan to try to address all that, and then involved all the environmental professionals to be able to move forward. That made a plan happy with everyone. So I know that the new person was not involved in that process, but the previous committee leader was, and we did talk to all the neighbors and engage on that, and we have received lots of support to this application received by the office here. So I would just ask that you consider that, because it's been a year.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because that's what the back of my head was like, I know we've seen this before.
Yeah.
So
you were not at that meeting last year, and that's one of the reasons they wanted it to go to APC, is because you weren't here.
Okay.
So that's part of the process, and so it didn't happen that we got to go to the APC meeting because it was canceled, but we did want to take all that initiative and gather the feedback. And neighbors have been really appreciative of the extra money we've spent and time to get to this place.
Okay. All right, then my concerns are satisfied.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, I don't have any objection to the recommendations as stated on page 8. I don't feel like it's my responsibility to make the motion, but I do want to just point out on page 11 and also the comment that this is done under bylaw 310 and that bylaw 722 has other provisions that are proposed, and so I think this is going to be part of the discussion later as my item of new business. I just want to kind of flag page 11 for the later on discussion. I don't feel like it's material to the discussion we're having right now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Director Ties. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm basically barking up the same tree as Director Ties, so perhaps we can defer that conversation. But I feel that this should move forward because it has been in process for a year and it appears the neighbors are supportive. Thank you.
All right, and with that, I will go back to Director Pratt.
Great. I am very happy to move the recommendations on page number 8, and then I'll follow up with my APC chair after. Sorry, that's not part of the recommendation, but
You're moving the recommendations.
I am
on page
moving
8.
the recommendations and
Thank
just as a
you.
comment and just follow up on that. And thank you for those comments.
And those have been seconded, so thank you very much. I don't see any other hands up unless Director Pratt still has her hand up. So I will call the question. All those in favor of the recommendations? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
You're welcome. And moving on to Annex E, Union of British Columbia Municipalities Resolutions. And we turn this over to our Executive Assistant.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to bring forward the SCRD's proposed resolutions for submission to the Union of BC Municipalities Conference in early September. The deadline to submit resolutions is June 30th, which means final resolutions must be endorsed by the board no later than the June 23rd board meeting. Staff have prepared draft resolutions on topics previously identified by directors, and they're presented here for your review and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we've got any discussion on these, I'd like to take them sort of one by one to approve. But if we don't have any discussion on them, somebody is welcome to move them as a block as suggested on page 17. Director Pratt, I saw you move your hand before Director McMahon, so go for it.
In regards, I did want to speak about the RV ones separately, and I have to apologize to Christine because she had sent me an email and I did not get back to it in a timely manner, so my apologies on that. But I just have a small adjustment I want to make there.
Okay, then let's take these one at a time. Accessing vehicular GHG emissions data. Does anybody have any comments? Director McMahon.
Yeah, this is just a minor edit to make it easier to read. The second line, where am I? Aha, sorry, I was on the wrong page. After the comma, I would say in order to develop local action plans. It just, because it kind of stopped me when I was reading. And I think if we add that, it makes it a little more readable. Other than that, it looked good to me.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything on accessing vehicular GHG emissions data? Director Pratt? No? Okay. In that case, would somebody like to move that the proposed resolution titled Accessing Vehicular GHG Emissions Data be approved as amended and submitted to UBCM for consideration at the 2022 UBCM convention prior to the June 30th, 2022 deadline? Moved, seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. The next one, shift to non-fuel based user pay taxation mechanisms to fund road infrastructure in rural areas of British Columbia. Does anybody have anything to amend or change or add to this? I don't see. Oh, Director McMahon?
Yes, the word upkeep is used as a verb, which I think it's a noun. I don't like verbing nouns. I thought the word maintain would be more appropriate. Sorry, that's in the first paragraph. To adequately maintain rural roads and highway infrastructure. I had some difficulty with the second paragraph following the logic. Where it says, gives an unfair advantage over more sustainable modes of transportation. What's the unfair advantage? I got a little lost in that. Thank you.
Director Ties.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to comment on that, and maybe we need to clarify that a little bit more. Essentially, what it means is that by having general tax revenue pay for our road infrastructure, it subsidizes roads, where other forms of transportation that would otherwise be more economically competitive, like rail, don't get that subsidy, and then you end up subsidizing roads and it therefore becomes uncompetitive for other modes of transportation that are more sustainable, like active transportation infrastructure or rail to be competitive. So does that make sense?
I would, yes and no. I think we're confounding two different issues there. because I can see that, yes, the funding does give an advantage to road travel for commercial shipping, but it doesn't give an unfair advantage to active transportation, which is in that sentence. And active transportation is supposed to be part of our road infrastructure. So what we're talking about is it's the users. Yeah. Just having a little difficulty with the clarity of this whole thing. And I'm sorry I didn't take enough time to really sit down and think this through last night.
I don't get to vote on this, but I would suggest that it would probably be really easy to simplify this by ending that second paragraph after gas tax funding mechanism, because it feels like trying to create a resolution that's taking two issues that are only slightly related and turning them into one resolution. So it might be advantageous to strip the second half of that second paragraph out. Which I'm seeing some nods from the staff desk, but I'll go to Director Lee with his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to comment prior to your suggestion. I think we have to remember that active infrastructure is not always on the side of the highway. It's only the rural areas that have that issue. Active infrastructure is also done on a standalone path through parks and other lands and stuff like that. So. But it is definitely not, well, I guess in municipalities it is covered by tax. It's only in the rural areas it isn't on the side of the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ties.
Yeah, I guess I thought that was a good supporting argument for this, but I guess we could strike that out as it doesn't actually address the problem directly. So I'd be in favor of just putting a period after mechanism and then striking out the rest of it for the sake of clarity.
Okay. Yeah, and then that other change of changing upkeep to maintain. Directors, any other comments or questions? If not, I will look for somebody to move a recommendation perhaps that the proposed resolution with that title be approved as amended and submitted to UBCM for consideration at the 2022 UBCM convention. Moved, seconded. Any other comments? Otherwise, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to standardizing health and safety rules and regulations to facilitate year-round housing in RVs. Director Pratt.
Thank you, and once again, thank you, Christine, and my apologies. What I will, it looks really good to me. I would suggest an edit on the last, from the comma, on the last paragraph. So, and it's actually that last excerpt and the inclusion of specific strategies, how that sentence begins. I would actually suggest that instead of that, we strike that and simply say, and for their inclusion within the BC Housing Action Plan.
Okay. Director McMahon.
I'm just wondering if it would be helpful in the third paragraph at the end there to add, so create an unclear regulatory environment for local governments in regards to recreational vehicles as permanent dwellings. Would that be helpful?
GM Hall, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. As one of the staff involved in drafting this, if it's helpful for context, in preparing this staff were cautious about balancing a recognition that recreational vehicles are being used as dwellings being used as a place to live, and we recognize that. But from a local government perspective, because of the building code and other provincial legislation, we don't have authority to treat them as dwellings, and so hence the wording that separates dwellings, which are a defined thing, from the practical reality that these are being used as a home for folks, and that explains both the comments from and suggestions and questions from Directors McMahon and Pratt, at least in terms of why staff are presenting the wording as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we've had that conversation about dwelling versus year-round living in the past as a careful use of terminology. So, Director Seegers?
Thank you. So I guess question to Director McMahon would be, is your wording reflected in the, therefore be it resolved piece? Because that does talk about using RVs for year-round living.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, that's fine. It was more for ease of reading, but I'm happy.
Okay. Director Pratt, or perhaps I'll go to GM Hall. The suggestion there of changing that and the inclusion of specific strategies within for their inclusion in the BC Housing Action Plan, does that provide staff any hesitation or pause, I guess I should say?
Not particularly, Chair. I'm sure that whichever provincial staff might be tasked with acting on this can figure out how to best position things. I guess, and here I'll express gratitude to my executive assistant colleague Christine, who had to figure out how to say this in a relatively few number of words. But the comment from planning in trying to build this for you was that as building and planning professionals, we would hate to advocate for something that in the long term develops a two-tiered system where only those who can afford houses that or homes that are compliant with things like seismic regulations and snow loads are able to access that kind of safe place to live. And so we're trying to separate out the fact, as I was saying a moment ago, that we realize descriptively that recreational vehicles are being used as homes, but professionally, neither building officials nor planners see that as an acceptable long-term dwelling solution for Canada, for anybody in the world. And we would advocate for quality housing for all. So hence the wording as chosen, but I think we're kind of saying the same thing. We need to respond to the reality in a housing strategy, knowing that there are thousands and thousands of people who are living in RVs. Thanks.
Thank you, GM Hall. Director Pratt?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, the goal is to get anybody into secure housing that is safe and safe, warm, comfortable. Housing used to be considered a basic need. It's now considered a frill, and anything to get housing, any kind of housing option, especially in an area where a number of people are facing homelessness. And we do happen to be in one of the more, I'm going to say, one of the more temperate zones of Canada. We have those options here. And I think asking the province to be to give us some better guidelines around that and recognize it that while we are in a deep housing shortage, that we need to be able to enable municipal governments and building officials to do this in a safe way that is that they feel comfort and are not accepting too much risk for municipalities and local government.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other hands up, so would somebody like to make a recommendation perhaps that the proposed resolution titled Standardized Health and Safety Rules and Regulations to Facilitate Year-Round Housing in RVs be approved as amended and submitted to UBCM for consideration at the 2022 UBCM convention? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, corporate officer.
Just some clarification on the amendment. Is it the first one that we are including, and for their inclusion within the BC Housing Action Plan in the therefore it be resolved clause? Is that the amendment?
Correct.
And Director McMahon's amendment was stricken?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Hybrid UBCM conferences. Directors, any modifications or tweaks to make to this one? Director McMahon.
Yes, my fault for not getting back to this sooner. I got distracted. I'd like to propose a slightly different wording to try out on folks. So, and I've emailed that out, just, but I think I changed it since I emailed it. Never mind, I'll forge ahead here. Whereas UBCM was established to represent local governments of all sizes and from all areas of the province, but elected officials from small and remote areas are not equally able to attend in-person conferences in Metro Vancouver and Victoria. And whereas UBCM has recognized the importance of reducing GHG emissions in response to the global climate emergency, but there are significant GHG emissions associated with travel and accommodation at conferences. Therefore, be it resolved that UBCM establish options for remote attendance at the annual UBCM conference that, at a minimum, give access to all speeches and informational presentations and to online voting for table officers in order, that should be for officers, in order to foster broader democratic participation in the organization and reduce GHG emissions.
Okay.
I felt that the motion as worded did not address the social equity portion of my concern. Although when I searched UBCM's website for the use of the phrase social equity, curiously, it doesn't appear, except in a couple of resolutions. And I don't see actually anything in their policies that that supports equality and democracy in BC, which I thought was a really interesting lack. Thank you.
Okay. Director Seegers.
Could you repeat the first clause of that? Because one of the things I think that also is an issue for those who are distant and small is the cost. And I don't know if that's addressed in here as well.
Director McMahon, are you able to screen share?
No, because I'm using two different devices here, so I can resend this by email quite easily.
Give me 1 second, and I'll put it up on the screen share.
Can I resend the email? Because
Because you changed it.
Can you please include the corporate officer in it when you do?
Yes, sorry, will do. Lori can sing now to provide the wait music.
Do 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 do. Oh, sorry, we're not subject to copyright there, are we? Maybe.
I mean, I guess we could take a 5-minute recess,
Could do that.
refill our coffee cups. So let's do that. Let's take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 10:50.
Because we don't want to listen to Lori.
That's right.
Yes.
And welcome back to the Electoral Area Services Committee for Thursday, June 16th. We are talking about hybrid UBCM conferences. Director McMahon, I've got your wording. Do you want me to put it up on the screen here for directors and just so the public knows what we're talking about here? All right, give me 1 second. Let's see if I can figure this out. It's been a while. There we go. So this is the wording for the resolution as proposed by Director McMahon. Directors, comments, questions? Sure. Director Hiltz.
Sure. In the, therefore, remote might be substitute electronic, because I think remote might be, you're thinking like an office somewhere, whereas I think we're generally calling it remote or electronic attendance now as a more, I think that's what we are in the Local Government Act, electronic attendance. That's one. And the weird, the broader, foster broader democratic participation, whether it's also reducing the barriers, that electronic participation reduces barriers. So I'm just wondering if that's another, rather than fostering broader democratic, it's about reducing the barriers to participation. Those are just kind of thoughts. Thanks.
Directors, any other thoughts, comments? Oops. Director McMahon, being that this is your wording?
I'm fine with that. You know, we're getting to the same point. I mean, I thought of going a little more into what the barriers were, but I think they can figure it out. I see Director Seegers has her hand up.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. It's just a little awkward now in that last piece. In order to reduce barriers to participation and broader democratic participation in the organization. Barriers to participation. And maybe and allow for broader democratic reduce barriers. Yeah, and take out the to participation before to reduce barriers and allow for broader democratic participation in the organization and reduce GHG emissions. I think that reads a little better. While you're looking at that, I'm wondering if in the first whereas at the top, so was established to represent local governments of all sizes and from all areas of the province, but due to the cost, elected officials from small remote areas are not equally able to attend in-person conferences in Metro Vancouver and Victoria. People be okay with that. That would be a comment after there. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Yes, I mean, we can say that. I will say that cost is not the only barrier, because, yeah, but sure.
I mean, cost doesn't have to be strictly financial either. Time, childcare, things like that. Director Pratt?
I actually think I would take out cost and have it as it was, because it's not just cost, and I don't want to get into an exhaustive list because you know, you can easily you can make it a priority to invest the funds for the elected officials to attend. But sometimes it is, you know, you're looking at a day and a half of travel from some of these locations to get to places. So I think let's just take out costs and take out that point, because otherwise we'd have to have an exhaustive list.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Director Lee.
I was wondering if we have to use the examples of Metro Vancouver and Victoria. We could be in Nanaimo or any major center. So I'm not sure.
Except that the UBCM conferences are in Vancouver, Victoria, or Whistler.
Or Whistler. We miss Whistler. Is there some more general, larger metropolitan areas or something?
I mean, we could just remove the entire in Metro Vancouver and Victoria block of text.
Yeah.
Director McMahon?
I'm torn. But in the lower left-hand corner of the province is what I was trying to get at. Yeah.
I think it's perfectly valid to leave it. Less is more. You know, if you consider things, you know, like there are sometimes, you know, LGLA or whatever. I mean, this is UBCM specifically, but there's no reason it couldn't be inspiring other organizations. Director Pratt?
Yes, inspiring other organizations, but it also opens up the possibility of Kelowna, Kamloops, a remote Prince George, you know, if in encouraging this. So I don't want to, I agree with dropping the major municipalities and just leaving it as in-person conferences.
Yeah, okay. I don't see any other hands up to wordsmith this. Give everybody one last opportunity to look at it before I stop the screen share. Director Lee?
I'm probably going to muddle this all up, but I was just thinking what Director Pratt just said. And if we had a conference in Prince George, would all of the people from Victoria and Vancouver be able to attend? But I think we're getting too deep into the weeds, and we'll just leave it like this.
Thank you for that. I'm going to stop my screen share now. And not seeing any other hands up, find my little script text here. Can I get a motion that the proposed resolution titled Hybrid UBCM Conferences be approved as amended and submitted to UBCM for consideration at the 2022 UBCM convention prior to the June 30th, 2022 deadline? Moved? Seconded? Director McMahon, I see your hand up.
I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for making it a better motion.
One of the opportunities where the drafting by committee works out well. I don't see any other hands up, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Next up, we have new business. Bylaw 310-722 comparison. Turn it over to Director Ties.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, it just has come to my attention several times, including page 11 of this agenda, that there are some substantial changes to Bylaw 310 proposed in Bylaw 722 that we haven't had a report on or any discussion. So I'm just wondering when and if such a report is planned and when we might be able to see it. Thank you.
Thank you. GM Hall.
Thank you, Chair. So staff are right in the middle of working on Bylaw 722, and I guess first thing to say is we've been really pleased with both the volume and the quality of feedback that we've received, especially since the bylaw was given first reading. But actually, that started even back in December when we wrote an introductory report that was on the then Planning and Community Development Committee agenda. which mentioned many of the items that you referenced, Director Ties. Our next step is to process what we heard from the public information meetings, the other feedback that we've been receiving through the Bang the Table platform, the Let's Talk SCRD, which is still live. And then, of course, our referral comments, which are starting to come in, and we expect many of them to be received in the coming weeks. And all of that is heading towards a report in July. That's our target. We are, and I hope the committee is supportive, where that's the timeline target that we've communicated to you previously, and we're staying on that path. But as we've said all along, we want to be responsive to what we hear. And so far we're keeping up with processing what's coming in, and I'm confident on that timeline. But if we really get some new, interesting, different, challenging feedback, then we'll report back to you on an updated timeline if and the cause for that as well. But next step will be a report in July, and we'll be looking to highlight many of the comparisons from the old bylaw to the proposed new bylaw in that report. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. That was me. Apparently I forgot to leave audio. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I got a couple of concerns, and I guess they're questions. Will bylaw 722 reflect the current OCPs? Because I understand that the general policy is set by the OCPs and the actual details are set by the bylaw. And my second question is, are we going to compare it to 337 and to make sure we're consistent up and down the coast? Because to me that seems an important thing to be doing. So, two questions.
GM Hall.
Thanks for the questions. On the first question about, sorry, the second question was about comparison to bylaw 337, and the first one I was working on the response and I've forgotten the thread, Director. My apologies.
Director Lee.
Oh, I could repeat the second one. I was wondering that my statement was that the OCPs set the policy.
Oh, yeah.
And the bylaws set the details. So
thank you for the prompt. So the scope of the project as a primarily a refresh and alignment exercise was considered such that the current OCPs should not require amendment based on what was presented at first reading. The committee will recall the board's support for a larger planning project that would review our OCPs and our zoning bylaws, and could lead to a sort of a generational evolution. So at the moment, the intention is that the new zoning bylaw is consistent with OCPs and doesn't engender amending them. On the second question, staff have, well, formally the scope of the project does not consider amendments to bylaw 337 at the current time. And again, I would focus on that next bigger project, which will be a comprehensive and holistic look at our OCPs and zoning bylaws, all of them. But that said, where we knew that bylaw 337 was better than bylaw 310, we attempted to take lessons from it and look for opportunities for alignment and harmonization. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Director McMahon.
Yes, I'm wondering about how we're rolling this out with our APCs. Because there is, feedback has been requested of my APC next week, but we won't have that July report in hand to outline some of the deeper details of how this goes between, what is the whole process here? How do they all fit together? There had been some discussion, or the suggestion was made that we could hold a briefing for all the APCs via Zoom so that they would have a chance to hear from planning directly and ask questions. So how are we going to work with our APCs here?
Thank you for the question. Staff are working on lining up a presentation or staff resources or other resources or all of the above for APCs right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. I don't see Director Hiltz. Go ahead.
Just to follow up with Director McMahon, so the timing of the APC, I'm going to call it an engagement, would that would happen before the July report?
Yes, Director, that's correct. As part of the first reading referrals, so we're engaging them early in the process. We want to hear their feedback on the proposal, and their comments will help inform what we write back in July.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any other hands up, so I think we've exhausted that topic. Thank you very much, GM Hall, for taking the questions. And thank you, Director Ties, for bringing it up. We don't have anything else in the reports, but we do have two pieces of communications. I know that in Annex F, the Sunshine Coast Community Forest, in the second to last paragraph of the letter, they have expressed that they would welcome an opportunity to present to the board on the progress that they have made in the foundations for ecosystem-based management. So I'm wondering if directors are interested in having them come and present, and if somebody would like to extend a motion to invite them. Director McMahon.
Katie, nice of you to give us that opening. So I'd like to move that the Sunshine Coast Community Forest be invited to present to a future committee meeting on their progress towards ecosystem-based management.
Great, thank you. And I have a seconder for that. Any other comment or questions on that? If not, all those in favor of the motion? And that's carried. Thank you very much. Is there anything else from either that letter or Annex G? Director McMahon.
Yes, on the best practices for marine docks, my recollection, and one of the other directors might recall better than I, but in the past, when we've been looking at best practices, we have turned to the best practices that the Seashell Nation provides. So I was just wondering how these align. Are they different? Is one standard higher than the other? Do we refer to one when we're in Howe Sound and another if we're in Jervis Inlet? Like, just curious.
I'm going to go to Director Ties.
Yeah, I do think that at the beginning, it does say that these best practices are based on a combination of the Islands Trust and the Rights and Titles Department of the Seashell Nation. So I'm assuming that they were consulted to and informed on what the Seashell Nation best practices are, and they do look quite similar. I think the Seashell Nation ones have some prescription on width of docks that I don't see in this one here, but and that's been a little bit controversial. The other thing I want to point out is that a lot of these recommendations or best practices are based on eelgrass and being in an eelgrass area, but there are, there's a considerable amount of docks, I'm sure, that are not in areas where eelgrass is growing or would be growing if they weren't there. So, yeah, I'm wondering if, I think an ecosystem-based approach where you're actually looking at a case-by-case basis to some extent is better than just saying, well, you have to have this in place when you actually don't. There are some deep water docks where eelgrass doesn't even grow. I know a marina, for example, that would apply to that. So, so yeah, just some thoughts around that. But certainly, best practices are a good guideline as long as there is some flexibility on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks, Director Ties. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. My overall question is what is the SCRD's role in dock processing right now? I don't believe we issue building permits for them, so I'm just looking, where is a place for the SCRD to even present this to the public as a option for a best practice? I'm all in support of presenting the information. I'm just wondering where the SCRD can actually fit in. If we don't have a way to engage the public directly through an application, how can we do it as an organization? Thanks.
Does the SCRD have a place in order to present this information? GM Hall.
Thank you, Chair. I think we do. We do formally. We are involved in building permit issuance if there's a structure associated with the dock, and if an application for provincial tenure affects one of our services, we will respond to that referral, which does occur from time to time. And then informally, we often engage with developers, applicants, property owners at the beginning of a construction project, for example, for a dwelling or another structure. And while we may not be involved in the dock per se, it is an opportunity for us to communicate best practices, and we do. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Follow up?
So as a follow-up, does staff need some kind of a resolution from the board and able to do what they're doing in terms of promoting best practices?
Thank you for the question. I don't think so. We've never, and I say that because we've never had direction to use any particular set of best management practices in the past. We've relied on multiple and the most applicable or suitable in the case, usually making clear reference to where we're drawing something from if we're using it as the basis for analysis. And planning staff are aware of this new tool and appreciative for its development and intend to include it in our toolbox. Thanks.
Okay, so staff are already working with it. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I was in communication with Ian on this subject. There's the Pender Harbour Dock Management Working Group has concerns about the width of the dock and the fact that that it is now standard practice to engage an engineer to say that 1.5 meters is too narrow. It needs to be 8 feet. And I haven't seen an application go in without that, so they consider it an unnecessary cost. And I note that that is in the best practices of the Howe Sound one here. But talking to the group that developed this, they say they are simply repeating the provincial government standard, and if it changes, they'll change. So that seemed logical to me. Best practices, of course, will affect us. When we go to change dock out now, we're going to have to pay extra to get engineering to make an 8-foot dock. So it does affect us in a way, but I'm not sure that we should be commenting on that. I'm not sure that this is the standard that everybody's going to have to follow. The provincial government standard is what we have to follow, so I'm not sure why this was done, but that's just my own concern. I do believe APC referrals are important for all of these applications because they have knowledge, local knowledge, that comes into play. But the way it sits now, that as long as we tell the APCs they're there, they comment, but they comment direct to the government. And I guess our staff will be in the same position. if they see the referrals and they have concern over something, like approach to one of our facilities and we don't want that dock, they could comment just like the general public could. So I think it could still work. But anyways, those were my two concerns.
Thank you, Director Lee. I don't see Director Hiltz. I do see you.
We're so close. I'm just thinking of a response back to the House on Hesbury in their letter, and so we would need a recommendation from board to respond back for staff to communicate what they communicated to us and how staff is communicating with the public about best practices. So would that be a requirement?
Only if we want it to be.
Or is staff replying back on without, or is staff already planning to reply back, I guess is the question. What's staff's actions at this point in response to the letter? How about that one? Thanks.
Ms. Reed?
Thank you, Chair. My recommendation would be if the board wishes a letter of response, that we put that in a recommendation. Thank you.
Director Hiltz?
I will move that the board supports a letter of response back to Hesbury. Is that enough? I think
Short
that's
and
enough.
sweet.
Short and sweet, thanks.
All right. Do I have a seconder for that? I do have a seconder for that. Director Lee, I see your hand up.
Yes, I have a concern about responding other than to say thanks for the letter, because there's several things in here that are actually not, they're not desirable to be in a standard for dock construction, including the 43% open space, because that is simply not possible. It's technically not possible. The flotation itself prevents it from being possible. Even if you had nothing in between the flotation, you couldn't make the 43%. So they haven't actually addressed that yet. And also the suggestion that you don't use encased, wrapped, or unwrapped polystyrofoam is in direct conflict with what they are doing and what the recommendations are in the DMP. They're suggesting something else as flotation without taking advice from professionals as to what would be the right thing. It's simply an environmental statement that whether it's possible or not, I don't know. And so I'm looking at page 25, by the way, if that's... So those were the discussions I had before I forgot the last one. This is not something that we should be building docks to right now. We need to leave it to the professionals rather than a group of citizens to decide. That's my opinion.
Okay. But a letter saying, thanks for your submission. You're okay with that?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
Okay. So keep it general, keep it vague. They know that we've received it, we've read it, had some conversation on it, but that we're not, not doing anything further with it.
That we're not endorsing the standards that are contained in it. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that's carried. Thank you very much. There is no in-camera session. Oh, I've got hands. Director Pratt.
Yeah, just before we adjourn, just wanted to wish Chair Toth a happy birthday this weekend.
Oh,
Wow.
Thanks, Director Pratt. For my birthday, I'll be working.
I'll be working for your birthday too.
There we go. We'll all work together separately. And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all those in favor? That's it. Thank you very much. We don't have any attendees online, and we haven't received any questions, so I think we are good to go. Directors, we do have another brief UBCM ministers meeting here that's been provided to us. And so we'll see you at the next one.